Hi, I'm Lena Rao. We're here in the TechCrunch TV studio for a special edition. I'm joined by Drew Houston, founder and CEO of Dropbox, Bryan Schreier, partner at Sequoia Capital, and a board member of Dropbox. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Thanks for having us.
We're doing something kind of different with you guys for this episode. We're going to talk about the dynamic between you and Bryan and how you guys work together on issues. And the first topic for this segment is recruiting and talent. Bryan, what is the dynamic when you're recruiting? What are you looking for Drew? And how do you guys balance each other out when you're trying to get someone and then Drew's closing it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it changes over time. Drew's always had this approach, which I think is really smart, of trying to meet the best people in the world at that function. So if he's recruiting someone to run sales, he wants to meet the best people out there to calibrate himself on the right profile for Dropbox. So that's one thing. I think in terms of how we can help out, it has to do with our business model at Sequoia. And our business model is about kind of partnering with as few companies as possible per year, as opposed to as many. So that means one or two per partner. And so for me, I wouldn't actually partner with a company that I wouldn't want to go work at myself, or I wouldn't try to convince my own brother to go work at. So when you sit down with someone who might be joining one of our companies, it's very easy to authentically say, this is a company that can change the world. And when they see the other companies that we've been involved with from that perspective, they know that we actually have the baseline to make that claim.
Drew, what would you say is the most important thing that you've learned about recruiting from Bryan? I mean, Bryan, it's important to acknowledge that you built teams at Google. You were leading international sales for them. I mean, you've had a lot of experience in building quality teams. So what have you learned from Bryan?
Well, first, I think that helping calibrate is really has been the most important thing. But also knowing, especially when we were in the first year or two, just learning how to recruit senior executives. What motivates them? What are the kind of hang-ups in the closing process? And how do you get people who have these really, really great jobs excited about something that has, like 9 scruffy-looking engineers and no business people?
Well, I think that goes to an interesting point in that how do you make, you guys have, I think at last count that was reported, around 250 employees. And how do you make, employee 251 feel like employee 5?
Well, I think people join because, great people join usually for the same reasons. They want to work on things that are important, and they want to learn and grow, and they want to be around people that they admire. And I think you want that whether it's a 5-person company or a 250-person company. And I think the reason how we get them excited because we're like, look, we're the only company at this stage that also has an audience in the hundreds of millions of people. And actually when you divide our user base by the number of engineers, for example, it's like you have more than 1 million people per engineer that you reach. Mm-hmm. And so that scale and the opportunity, there's so many things in the company that are a blank slate that you can own something that would have a much bigger scope than even if you started your own company.
Would you agree with that, Bryan?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think also the other topic here is culture, and culture is talked about a lot, and obviously incredibly important as you're building a company, potentially the most important thing. But one of the benefits of building the kind of culture that Dropbox has is that no matter what the size of the company is, it becomes a magnet for talent, right? And so Dropbox at 250 is just as exciting because they've always hired great people, but you can hire more and more great people, and then you get this snowball effect, which I think only a few companies in the Valley have been able to create, Apple, Google, Facebook. And I truly believe that Dropbox is one of these companies because they've been so incredibly careful about investing in culture as you go. So you can absolutely feel it the minute you walk in the door, and I think that's a big part of recruiting and retaining and closing people.
And you can be, if you are an engineer and you program in Python, you can start at Dropbox and be sitting next to Guido van Rossum, or if you use Facebook, you can be in the same conference room as the people who built it. And if you're a designer, you can be working with the guy who created the like button. And I think that's a big part. Once you build that kind of nucleus, you can a lot of really great people also want to join.
How do you fold in, people that are coming from acquisitions as well as, employees that are just joining organically? I mean, how do you balance between, making sure everyone is on the same page and fits that culture that Bryan was talking about?
I think it starts way before you talk terms or talk about a deal. It's really, we spend a lot of time getting to know the founders, and we want to know what makes them tick and what motivates them. And so the ones that work are where the founders want to do really big things, and they realize that Dropbox can provide them a platform where they can just focus on building a really great product, and they don't have to worry as much about all the other dozens of things that you have to worry about when you're running or building your own company.
For a key hire, how many times would you meet with a prospective employee?
I think it depends, but it's usually many hours, several meetings. They meet me, they meet Arash, my co-founder, they meet Bryan, they meet a lot of people on that team.
Have you always agreed on everyone? I mean, do you ever disagree?
I'm sure.
I'm
sure. We've learned a lot on this one together, I think. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I mean, I'm curious, just how does that dynamic work when you do disagree? What is there usually something you disagree over, or? Well,
what I try to do is provide a service to Drew and Arash and the team, and it's not very useful for people to for someone to always just agree. I think that when you're building out any team, and I try to be, in the front row seat, but not think I'm in the company, but when I do think of myself as part of an extended team. And when you build a team, you want complementary skill sets and also different viewpoints. And so in some ways, it's actually my job to disagree at times and try to point out things that may not be obvious from the context in which Dropbox has met the person. But actually, I think we tend to agree most of the time. Yeah.
I think in any case that we have, and it's really, it's usually been a case where Bryan has known or worked with people who are even better than a given candidate that we're talking to, and then it's usually a pretty easy conversation when you go meet people who are truly world class. Then you're like, oh yeah, why would we settle for anything less?
I'm curious a little bit, Bryan. You come from Google, and Google has its own very, sort of formulaic way that they hire. How have you brought that over to, advising Drew on how he approaches hiring?
I think very carefully, because Google was built at a very different time. Google was the scaling of the company in terms of the first few thousand people was 98 through 2004. And not only was it a different economic environment, there wasn't the same war for talent back then. Things were pretty bleak, and so it was a different ball game. But you also had, very different fundamentals of building a technology company. Right now you can get a lot of infrastructure on demand from Amazon, for example. So you have to be very, very careful about trying to apply, previous patterns. VCs talk a lot about pattern matching, and I actually think that's very dangerous. Instead, it's probably more about calibration and going to the first principles of why you're hiring someone, how they fit with the culture, and the other criteria, and just having a little bit more perspective, because my job is to spend time away from Dropbox as well as the team at Dropbox is so laser focused on their business. Hopefully I can bring some of those things to the table.
So last question on this segment, but I'm curious, where are you focusing your hiring efforts right now? I read that your current office can hold as many as 600 people or so. So we're probably going to see you ramp up the hiring. Where are you looking? Is it all across?
We've never stopped ramping up the hiring. it's like we're hiring everywhere. In every function in the company, we're hiring engineers, designers, product people, but then also senior folks. The company has tripled in the last year, and we're still going to be hiring hundreds of people in the next year. So it never stops.
Great. Well, join us on the next segment to talk about Drew's evolution as a founder to a CEO and how Bryan has helped him with that.